The big poverty debate tonight. Let's raise the big question that Niti Aayog report on poverty, is it genuine or has the data been fudged? Who performed better on poverty, the Modi government or the previous Manmohan-Singh government? What is the real poverty count in the country at the moment? That's the big debate. And joining me now, therefore, on that big poverty debate, two very special voices, joined by Dr. Surjit Bhalla, not too long ago, India's Executive Director at the International Monetary Fund. Also joining me, Professor Santosh Mehrotra, Human Development Economist, who's a visiting fellow at the Center for Development, University of Bath. Appreciate both of you joining us. Dr. Bhalla, today the Prime Minister, in a way, has taken this debate a step further by saying that 25 crore Indians have been lifted out of poverty in the last 10 years, citing that Niti Aayog report that suggests, based on multidimensional poverty, India's poverty declined from 29.17% in 2013-14 to 11.28% in 2022-23. 24.82 crore people lifted out of poverty as per that estimate. Do you agree with it? Or do you believe, as the critics are saying, that this is politically expedient, economically unsound?
Yeah. One, I completely reject that this methodology is unsound or that what the critics are saying is correct. Completely wrong. Look, I've gone through the multidimensional report. I've gone through the update. I've gone through what Santosh Mehrotra has written. And it seems that, if anything is politically motivated, is Mehrotra's analysis. I'm happy to explain now, or we can do it later.
We'll come to that in a moment, but I want to understand from you. You therefore believe these are credible numbers because you also, during your IMF days, had put out a similar report on poverty figures saying it had come down substantially. You believe that it is fair to say there's been a substantial decline, but dare I say it's not from 2013-14, but way back in 2004-05, the UPA too can claim credit that as many as 27 crore people were lifted out of poverty, if anything even more, during the UPA years.
Yeah, look, if we are going to have a discussion, what is very important is to get the definition. I know it's not very easy to transmit over TV channels, but to get the definition of poverty. Now, as it happens, I don't think that the multidimensional poverty index is an improvement over the good old-fashioned absolute poverty index, which has been developed and used by India and the World Bank for the last 40-odd years. So this is, something I might agree with Santosh on, that I am not a big fan of the multidimensional poverty index. So that's the first point. The second point is that the method that they have used, given the MPI, is completely correct. There's nothing wrong with what they have done. Let me just explain to the listeners and to the viewers what the multidimensional poverty index was done through a survey, which, mind you, is worldwide. Many countries do that, in 2005-06, and then again in 2015-16. Now, as everybody is interested in, what happened in the year prior to 2015-16 or 13-14, year prior to when Mr. Modi became Prime Minister. That's a complete, sensible try and approach to find out what was there in the base year. Now, what they do, the Niti report, is takes the percentage change on annualized basis, which is the simplest method to do, and there's nothing at all wrong. Matter of fact, the world over, whenever you have to adjust, you do that. The same thing is done to get the 22-23 estimate by looking at the trend decline 2019 to 21. Okay? So I don't know, I read Santosh's piece, and he finds both of these approaches problematical. Nothing wrong with it. This is, econ or statistics 101.
Okay.
So that's my first major point, that the objection to it is completely misplaced.
I'll get Santosh, therefore, to respond to that. Then we'll come to comparing the UPA years with the NDA years. But Santosh, you want to respond to that? According to Professor Bhalla, nothing wrong in the way the calculations have been done.
No, nothing wrong in the way the calculations were done by UNDP in New York. But there's plenty wrong with what has been done in India by the Niti Aayog. I think that's really the difference. There is no difference between Surjit and I in regard to our view of the MPI. The MPI is essentially a conceptually flawed index. So let me begin with that, because what the government is attempting to do, very unfortunately, is to set up the MPI as an index as opposed to the consumption poverty. The government's not collected data on consumption poverty, and we are now going through a consumption expenditure survey in 22-23 and in 23-24, for which we will get the data in sometime in 25. And the problem with the MPI, let me just say, is the following, conceptually. You see, you look at the various types of 10 indicators that go in, and the government has added on 2 more to benefit its own possible outcomes. Look at the education one. They are sort of output and process indicators. The health ones are outcome indicators. But the basic amenities one are all input indicators. You know, conceptually, statistically, you cannot bring together into one index four types of indicators: input, output, process, and outcome. Point 1. Point 2, the government, in its estimation of the number of people that were declared as having been raised above the poverty line between 2015-16 and 2019 and 20, had itself made a mistake or made a deliberate mistake in order to inflate the numbers that are supposed to have been pulled up. People have been pulled up above the poverty line, this so-called MPI poverty line, no question. I agree entirely. Final point about projecting from 2019 data all the way to 2023, when COVID intervened in between, is assuming that the education outcomes were not impacted by COVID. For 2 years, children were not attending school. And school attendance is one of the indicators of the Niti Aayog. I mean, for God's sake, are you seriously saying that the attendance is not happening, and that's not going to impact the outcomes into the future? And Surjit feels that there is no problem with projecting onwards from 19 to 20 to 21 to 22 to 23. Because only half the states were captured in the 2019 data. And again, the next half was captured in 2021. You're again projecting, beyond COVID years for 22, 23. So there is a host of problems with the MPI. And unfortunately, the government is just selling a narrative, and it's unfortunate. It's very sad.
You're saying the government is selling a narrative. Surjit Bhalla, you want to respond specifically to the argument that particularly post-2019, given what happened during COVID, given the fact also that health and education expenditures, if anything, have not risen in this period, there are serious question marks over the manner in which you can suddenly extrapolate using 2019 numbers for 2023.
No, a funny thing is that I use the same term, the narrative, to explain the actions of economists like Santosh. Look, this thing, poverty debate and the discussion about the methodology is at least 65, 70 years old. And they have problems with no matter what index you have. Let me just take, these are well discussed in the literature. This is not anything new. Let us take the simple thing of, let us say you really find the kids not attending school problematical during COVID, and you want to adjust for that. then you can adjust for it because all the components are there. And you'll find out that really it'll make very little difference to the overall aggregate trend. And this accusation that this index of inputs and outputs and getting us all confused, you know, the HDI developed by Amartya Sen also has these problems. Actually, the NPI is an extension of the index developed by Amartya Sen. So I don't understand. You know, let's be concrete. Let us get to the numbers, and let me just last explain that, you know, in my report that you referred to in the introduction,
yes,
we had looked at consumption poverty and only at consumption poverty. And that is the result we got from consumption poverty, and it was back in 2020. So no matter how you slice the data, no matter, I challenge you, Rajdeep, you, Santosh, anybody else to come up with an estimate which is reasonable, reasonably grounded in reality rather than in narratives.
No, so away from the narratives, am I right? And I'm looking at it from a lay viewer point of view, and either one of you can dive into it, but Professor Mehrotra, you can start on this.
Yeah.
Am I right in saying that I'm using UPA 1 period 2004-5 up to UPA 2 2013-14, and now 9 years of the Modi government? Am I right in saying that there has been a decline in reduction in absolute poverty levels, extreme poverty, if anything, declined even sharper during the UPA years, and it has continued to decline, albeit less sharply now? Would I be right in saying that or not? If I, as a viewer, said, yes,
You'll
Professor.
be absolutely right. You'll be absolutely right.
It's just the opposite. It's just the opposite.
Okay, you're saying the opposite. Then let's hear both. Okay, Professor Mehrotra, you first, and then I'll get Surjit to respond. Yes.
Yeah. So first of all, it has been a consistent improvement. Firstly, so there is no question about that. As far as Surjit's point that HDI has the same conceptual problem as the MPI, no, that it does not. I used to be chief economist of the Global Human Development Report in New York, and I've also led the team that wrote the India Human Development Report 10 years ago. I do know the difference between them. The HDI indicators, sub-indicators are all output or outcome indicators for the most part, and that is absolutely untrue for the MPI. The majority of the 10 indicators are input indicators. You cannot get to a so-called poverty from that. Second point, I'm not the only one who's questioning the government economists, and I notice that I've not named Surjit for once. The point is, there's a whole slew of government economists who are selling a narrative, and Rodriguez has had a whole debate in the Indian Express with but
just a minute. What's the narrative? Is the narrative the fact that you're saying poverty has not declined? There is an admission, I think, somewhere, Professor Mehrotra, that poverty has declined, as you said, absolute poverty. The question is whether it's declined to the extent that the government claims. Am I right?
That is one. The other point, I think, the other point that your viewers need to understand is that the fact of the matter is that all the collateral evidence around consumption poverty is nowhere close to what Dr. Bhalla is claiming. Dr. Bhalla's methodology of estimating decline in consumption poverty, no one in the world uses it. He has used national account statistics from India to actually arrive at a consumption poverty estimate of 1% of the population is poor. No one in the world believes that, because the world over, for the longest time, this is the consumption poverty is estimated on the basis of consumption surveys. And we haven't had a consumption expenditure survey thanks to the government. We know this. This is the problem for all this debate.
Okay,
It's very unfortunate that we are having to have this debate. There's no such debate around this in the period from 2004 to 12, because we know that consumption poverty fell dramatically for the first time in India's post-independence history by the nationally accepted poverty line. the number of people who were pulled above the consumption poverty was 140 million. Never in India's history before 2004, Rajdeep, had 140 million people been pulled up in a matter of 7 or 8 years. That's 20 million people being raised above the poverty line every year. We cannot claim anything of that kind.
Okay, because you're saying because there was a clear consumption survey at the time which gave you those figures that 140 million had been pulled out of poverty in the UPA years. You want to respond, Dr. Bhalla? You actually believe it's the reverse?
Yeah. Yeah. Look, first of all, this is really an unnecessary debate. Santosh says that what the methodology we followed is never done by anybody because there wasn't a consumption survey. And he misquotes or perhaps deliberately otherwise, that I'm using national accounts data. What we are using is what the world over, including from the center of all of this discussion, the World Bank does. When you do not have a survey, and most countries do not have a survey every year or every 2 years or every 3 years. When you don't have a survey, consumption survey, what the World Bank does is takes the growth rate in consumption as revealed by the national accounts and plants it on the household data to get the poverty estimate.
But why do you believe?
Exactly
but why do you believe it's the? No,
so
just a minute. Why do you believe it's the reverse? May I ask you why do you believe it's the reverse? That actually in the last 9 years, many more people have been lifted out of poverty. Yes.
Yes. I'm coming to that.
Please.
Okay. Just a minute. So first, the assertion that what I do is unique, or what me and my colleagues do is unique and wrong, is completely wrong.
Okay.
So we should not be debating that. This is a practice. Second, now we come to the interesting question of was the poverty decline greater between 2004 and 2013 or 2004 and 11 and post 2014? That's a more interesting question. If you look at the MPI, it shows that it is greater. Now, take the absolute poverty measure, where we showed that was only 1 percentage point. Once you get to the absolute poverty measure, what percentage of the population is poor? As you get lower and lower, the percentage change from 2 to 1 is 100%, whereas in other terms, it's only 1 percentage point. So what we do, and what I think is correct, you choose a higher poverty line, and let's take 3.2 rather than 1.9. This is again World Bank International poverty lines. And according to the higher poverty line, there is a much greater decline in the number of people lifted out of poverty in the post-2014 period. So, we have to be somewhat accurate in this. You can I can show you numbers that show that, look, in percentage decline, this was greater, and this is more, very simply, more people were lifted out of poverty, because once you get to 0 or 1% poor, there isn't much left to lift out of poverty.
But can I ask you this?
That's a heuristic way just to say.
Sure, but can I push you on this, Dr. Bhalla, that if then you have a situation where the government has already extended its scheme for free grain, free ration to 80 crore people for another 5 years. If India ranked 111 out of 125 countries in the Global Hunger Index 2023, are we looking at this issue perhaps from the wrong prism? Are there serious concerns on the ground which these numbers do not really suggest?
Yeah, that's a good question, Rajdeep, and I wish we would have more of a discussion on that. The hunger index, back in the 1950s and 1960s and 1970s and 1980s, that the World Bank and the government of India and other people and economists in India defined poverty according to caloric consumption, which was a close proxy for hunger. Now, did a study for the World Bank where the calorie consumption for the US, if you took that, then 80% of Americans were malnourished. So let us not go to the other route of coming up with an index or a measure which is meaningless. I think hunger is an important, on hunger again, the NSS, Government of India, used to do a survey, and they stopped it in 2004 as part of the consumption survey. How many 2 square meals a day did your family get or not get? And it was down to 2% of the population. So I think there are various ways you can measure and offer an index for anything that you want to show. That's not the way that academics work, and I hope that's not the way that policymakers work. What we have is food is a very important component. Again, according to the NSS survey, 46% of consumption is food. I think it's much lower than that, but that's what the 2011-12 survey showed. And therefore, if you're giving free rations, and this is all discussed in the joint paper on the IMF, this is all discussed in detail as to how much a difference does the food consumption make, or the free food grains makes. And actually, let me just point out one last thing, that you know, the World Bank, when I presented this findings at the World Bank, they also objected, no, you can't do it this way, etc. And finally, they came around to that our method of accounting for food subsidies in the reduction of poverty was correct.
Okay.
So I want to
just
say
get Professor
that the world over, everybody approves of the...
Okay, let me get Professor Mehrotra to respond. Professor Mehrotra, then is it coming down to the fact that because we don't have a proper consumption expenditure survey at the moment, that's why these numbers are being questioned so rigorously by economists like you? Otherwise, yeah, go ahead.
No, that's not the only reason. I think I pointed out earlier that there are conceptual flaws with the MPI as an index, and those have been added to by the government's own addition to and changes to the 10 global indicators. That's problem number one. I think the last point I would make is that it's interesting that Dr. Bhalla keeps coming back to the World Bank's methodology and the World Bank's numbers, and the World Bank has not accepted the 1% poverty that he has estimated in his working paper for the IMF.
So what is your estimation of poverty? What is your estimation? When the government today uses Niti Aayog's report and the Prime Minister then quotes it to suggest that we've had this sharp decline in poverty, what is your number?
No, how can you have a number of the kind which is comparable to the consumption poverty in the way it has been estimated? Because you don't have the data. Rajdeep, we haven't got the data. The 17-18 data, the NSS was rejected. And since then, it could have been done before the elections. It is not being done. It's being completed now in 22-23. Another round is happening in 23-24. We will not know. This is the problem, which is why we are debating MPI, a flawed indicator. That's the problem.
And what specifically in the MPI do you believe the government of India has added to try and, in a way, cushion what may be the reality on the ground? What are the indicators that according to you, should not have been there?
They've changed the indicators to suit Indian statistics. This is problem one. Problem two, they've added on the number of bank accounts open. Now, I mean, the point is, do you have any conceptual basis for adding on or taking away and changing, or you don't? And so, in other words, you're confounding an already poorly designed multidimensional poverty index. That's the foundational problem.
Okay, I just have a couple of questions, and both of you are, look at politics sharply as well. So I'll end with that. We are in an election year. Dr. Bhalla, how do these numbers play out? Can the government of the day go out there and say as confidently as the Prime Minister did today that we brought down poverty in the last 9 years? Is that something that he can realistically go to the people and say with confidence?
Absolutely, and there's every number in the world, every evidence in the world that will support him in stating that. So I think unquestionable, you know, I'm working on a book. I mean, no matter what you look at, you want to look at consumption of food, you want to look at consumption of fast-moving goods, you want to look at how much transfer of food is. I mean, I can't heuristically. Please tell me, how can you say that poverty has not come down at a sharp? You have to have some evidence. No, we can keep saying that this is not there, that is not there, we don't have the data. That doesn't take us very far. You know, when I went to graduate school, the big story was that the mark of a good economist is what he or she does with bad data. Okay? You will never have perfect data. All economists in the world have to work with bad data in order to find out, glean out what is happening. Well, why can't Santosh do that?
Okay, but in some cases there's a huge problem with the data itself, some would argue. But Santosh Mehrotra, that same question to you. Politically, can the government of the day go to the people and say we brought down absolute poverty? Or can the UPA or the opposition say, look, we did a much better job than you did?
We can say hand on heart during the UPA that consumption poverty was not just brought down, but dramatically brought down in a way that has not been done, that had not been done before, nor has been done since. Because all the evidence about consumption and income is that, first of all, the growth rate has been systematically lower in the last 9 years compared to the 10 years of the UPA. The second point...
Yes, but inflation was higher. You see, you can pick and cherry pick the numbers. Inflation was higher in the UPA years compared to the last 9 years. So,
hold on. No, inflation might have been higher. However, the fact of the matter is that real wages rose faster. That's the point. We have the data for the real wages for both periods. And that is the basis for my questioning what would have happened to poverty. I'm drawing an inference. We also have very hard data for employment. And all that has happened in the recent past is that the employment has appeared to increase because what has in fact happened is unpaid family labor has increased. That's what has happened. And that has given the impression of employment increasing when in fact it's unpaid family labor that is being pulled in. There is no evidence of wages increasing. I've demonstrated this for agriculture. You couldn't have got agricultural wages increasing if 60 million workers went back to agriculture. Secondly, there's no evidence that manufacturing wages have been improving. There's no evidence that services wages have been improving. And joblessness has definitely increased. Okay. Youth unemployment is twice as much as it used to be in 2012. So, you know, there is plenty of additional evidence that would support the idea that, you know, poverty is not declining in the way is being claimed. I'm talking about consumption poverty. And we also know, I mean, Goldman Sachs, S&P, they're all coming out with report after report saying, oh, affluent consumers are doing very well. Their demand is buoyant. But for the rest, and who are the affluent? 4% of the total population, for God's sake. I mean, let's get a hold of the reality here rather than, you know, simply making claims.
Yes, Mr. Bhalla, you put up your finger. I must give you the last word then.
No, look, I just think that a more reasoned discussion of the data would show you, including wages data, including employment data of the poor. And when I say the poor, I'm really meaning the bottom half of the population, the bottom 50%. Every piece of data shows that the bottom 50% has really, matter of fact, you know, I call this redistribution with growth. This is what is happening in India. and maybe we can have a more reasoned discussion next time. Absolutely no question that the bottom 50% of India has never had the rate of improvement as it has had in the last 10 years.
Okay, let's leave it there. We will have many more such debates. The good news is when you get two fine minds giving you two alternate perspectives, it only gives you a greater opportunity to have a conversation. And I'm grateful to both of you for sharing your views, and we leave it then to the viewers to judge. Has poverty declined as substantially as the government claims, or does the UPA have more to claim when it comes to poverty reduction? Thank you both, Dr. Surjit Bhalla, Professor Mehrotra, for joining me.